It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
The time to talk about Russia. We spent a lot of time talking about Gaza, and we've been at it already for an hour. So we'll spend a little bit of time on Russia, but not a ton of time. There's some other big developments in the war in Ukraine. And here we go again. I mean, it's the same story, which is that, and it's almost funny at this point. Last week, Trump announces there's going to be another meeting between him and Putin in Hungary. He's optimistic again, okay? Every other week, it's a new policy. You know, so 2 weeks ago, he was saying, we're going to take back all of Ukraine. We're going to give them Tomahawk missiles. We're done playing around. We're going to put a 6 million% tariff on India. Like, that's where he was 2 weeks ago. Then last week, he said, no, we're not going to give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles. And I get along great with Russia. And maybe we'll give them Donetsk. And we're going to meet again in Hungary, and we're going to finally bring this war to an end. Now, this week, that's all off. There's going to be no meeting in Hungary. There's more sanctions on Russia, and they've green-lighted missile strikes against Russia all over again. What are we doing? What's the play here? What's the strategy? So, like I said last week, Trump said that there would be a meeting between our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, our top diplomat, and their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Rubio and Lavrov were supposed to meet this week. And then on the heels of that meeting, Trump was supposed to meet Putin again, another summit in Budapest to negotiate the end to the war in Ukraine. And it looked like Trump was leaning back towards favoring Putin. He had a meeting with Zelensky, and in that meeting, Trump declined to give Zelensky Tomahawk cruise missiles, which have a much greater range than all the other weapon systems that Ukraine has, and might allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russia's heartland, deep into their core territory. So Trump shut that down, and Trump announced this big meeting. Another breakthrough occurred. And if you've been following the negotiations, this will mean something to you. The Russian government intimated to the United States that they might be willing to make concessions in Kherson and Zaporizhia, which are the other two oblasts that Russia is in southern Ukraine. They might give up some of that territory, and in exchange, they would take all of Donetsk from Ukraine. And it looks like they're coming down from some of their positions, because earlier they said they want all four of these territories. They want Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk. And they only fully control Luhansk. They want full control of the remaining three, and they want everyone to recognize their claim over those four territories. And that, as of August, when Trump and Putin had their summit in Alaska, that was Russia's big demand. They want all that territory, Ukraine to stay out of NATO, among other things. That was their demand. Well, last week, the Russian government suggested, well, maybe we'll give up a little bit of the territory that we've conquered in the south in exchange for more territory in the east, in the Donbass. And it was claimed that when Zelensky met with Trump last week, that Trump asked Zelensky if he'd be okay with that, if he might give up some of that territory in Donetsk. And Zelensky said no. That's where it stood as of last week. So Trump was going into this week, a Rubio-Lavrov meeting, and then a summit in Budapest, and they might, with the current contact line as the starting point for negotiations, they might have an imminent ceasefire. Well, now, all of a sudden, all of that is off. And so the big developments this week are that the Rubio-Lavrov meeting has been postponed a week. The Trump-Putin meeting is canceled. There's no word on whether that's been postponed, whether there'll be another meeting. It's just off. And the biggest developments are these, that Trump has authorized Ukraine to strike inside Russian territory, and that Trump is now putting sanctions on Russia's energy companies. And this is a story from the New York Times. It says, quote, President Trump announced on Wednesday that he was imposing significant new sanctions on Russia for the first time in a second term, underscoring a new degree of frustration with President Putin after a plan for the two leaders to meet in Budapest fell apart. The sanctions targeted Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Mr. Trump's irritation with the Russian leader was evident on Wednesday. He said, quote, every time I speak with Vladimir, I have good conversations, and then they don't go anywhere. He explained his decision to scrap the Budapest summit that had been planned for some time in the coming weeks. He said, it just didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were going to get to the place we have to get, so I canceled it. The sanctions are among the most significant measures the United States has taken against the Russian energy sector since the beginning of the war. The Biden administration avoided levying sanctions against those companies to allow for legal purchase of Russian oil by American allies. Targeting the companies could make a meaningful dent in Russia's oil revenues. Here's the story about the missiles. It says Ukraine's military said on Tuesday that it used British-provided Storm Shadow missiles to strike a chemical plant inside Russia's Bryansk Oblast, signaling that the United States is again supporting Ukrainian missile strikes on Russian territory. A massive combined missile and airstrike was carried out, including with air-launched Storm Shadow missiles that penetrated Russia's air defense system, said the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces in a statement, according to Reuters. Storm Shadows are produced jointly by the UK and France and have a range of about 150 miles. Ukraine first began firing them into Russia last year, along with U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles, which can hit targets up to 190 miles away. In August, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Trump administration was not allowing Ukraine to fire those missiles into Russia, a policy that also applied to the Storm Shadows, since the Ukrainian military requires U.S. targeting data to fire either of the missile systems. Another report from the outlet this month said that President Trump reversed the policy and signed off on providing Ukraine with intelligence for long-range missile strikes on Russian territory. So another reversal. It's always back and forth. 1 month, we're going to meet with Russia. Rubio is in Saudi Arabia meeting with Lavrov. It's going great. They're normalizing relations. The rest of it, opening up the embassies again. Then the next month, it's more sanctions, secondary sanctions, more missiles, more intelligence, more military aid to Ukraine. And then the next month, it's another peace agreement. It's another summit. So now we're on the other side of it again. The United States is authorizing Ukraine to bomb Russia, okay? And by the way, these are effectively American strikes on Russia. These are American-provided weapon systems. They require U.S. intelligence to launch them. In many cases, it is Americans that are operating the systems. And it's happening off the books, but make no mistake about it, you've got French, British, German, American officials inside Ukraine coordinating with Ukraine, training up their soldiers, demonstrating how to use the systems, providing the coordinates, providing the intelligence. This isn't effectively an American operation. So Ukraine is bombing Russia with American missiles. Americans are literally entering in the coordinates. And now the United States is sanctioning Russia's oil companies. And what that means is that eventually we're going to be enforcing these sanctions. So if there are Russian tankers that are providing the energy, we might be put in a situation like NATO was a few weeks ago, where we have to actually interdict these ships. Russia's operating a shadow fleet where they're bypassing the sanctions. China is helping them do this. In some ways, Europe is complicit in this. Are we prepared to interdict Russian oil? Are we prepared to put secondary sanctions on India, China, maybe European countries? This is a major escalation. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that we are not willing to pull the plug on Ukraine. Ukraine still thinks they're going to win this war, but they're not going to. Ukraine and the Europeans still think they're going to win. They still think they have some card to play here. They still think they have leverage. They're saying, we're not going to give up any territory. We can't let Russia What do you mean let Russia? Russia's taking it from you. There's no let. You have no control over the situation. Kiev does not, Paris does not, London does not, Berlin does not. And so this is the state of the negotiation. It's very clear. There is panic and alarm in the West because they know that Russia is unstoppable. Ukraine is not going to be able to hold the line much longer. They're losing this war badly. They're running out of manpower. Russia is preparing to mount a winter offensive, and they haven't been making huge gains. They've been struggling, for example, in Pokrovsk. I think I'm saying that right, which is a major city they fought for years. They control half of it now. They might at any moment break through, and if they win one of these major cities, they might make a mad dash to the river. Ukraine is preparing for this. Europe is preparing for this. They know that they can't stop Russia. And so now, if you paid attention, their demands have changed. And so under the Biden administration, the rhetoric was, and the demands were, we're going to take back all the territory that we've lost. We're going to take back Crimea. We're going to take back the Donbass. We're going to take back all these other territories. And we're going to send the Russians home. That is out of the cards now. That's off the table. So now that Trump is in office, the message has changed. And now they're saying, they're raising the white flag and saying, just stop. They just want Russia to stop. That's why they're saying ceasefire. They're saying freeze the line of contact. And why are they saying that? It's obvious. They know Ukraine has no ability to counterattack. There's going to be no more counteroffensives. There's going to be no more counterattacks. They can barely hold the line. They barely have enough soldiers. So why have the demands changed? They used to be so bold, saying, we're literally going to push the Russians back. We're going to mount this counteroffensive, the spring counteroffensive, and we're going to shove them back over the border. Now they're waving the white flag and saying, just stop. Just stop the Russian advance, freeze the line of contact. And the reason they're saying that is because they want to rearm. They want to give Ukraine the opportunity to give their soldiers a reprieve. They want to mobilize more men, train more men. They want more equipment from the United States. They want to rebuild their defensive line. Russia has beaten back a series of defensive fortifications that were laid down over the past 11 years. And so Ukraine and the West wants an opportunity to build all of that back up. More manpower, train more soldiers, more equipment, more drones, missile defense systems, and they want to build another trench. That's the goal. And Russia knows that. That's why Russia is not agreeing to a temporary ceasefire, because they know that if there's a temporary ceasefire and fighting resumes, it's just going to be more difficult for Russia. And who knows, on a long enough timeline, maybe Ukraine pushes back. So this is the state of the play. Now, the big concern among the Ukrainians, why will they not agree to give up this territory? They want concessions actually from the United States. If Ukraine cannot join NATO, and if they have to give up this territory, they're very concerned that Russia might restart the war. Let's say we give up all this territory, Ukraine is out of NATO. Even if they're able to rebuild their defensive fortifications and retrain their armed forces, they're worried that Russia, without a NATO commitment, is going to start the war all over again to take more territory. Both sides will get a reprieve. Russia will get sanctions relief. Russia will be able to rebuild their economy, get more credit. They'll be able to rebuild a little bit on their side. And then who knows? In a long enough timeline, in years, maybe a decade, Russia will restart the advance and they'll be back to take more territory. They'll have the element of surprise. So what Ukraine wants are security guarantees. Well, how do you finesse this? That's sort of the whole point. Russia wants Ukraine out of NATO. If Ukraine agrees not to be in NATO, they're saying, well, we want a security commitment. Well, that's what NATO is. NATO is a security commitment. So how do you give Ukraine a NATO-like security commitment without giving them NATO and effectively that form of a security commitment? So there's all kinds of creative solutions that are being put out there, like, for example, that the United States will take a stake in Ukraine's minerals and energy resources. Because if Americans are put in the way of the Russian military, that serves as an unofficial tripwire. Russia cannot restart the war without killing Americans, which would bring America back in. And that's how you get a form of a soft security guarantee. You don't have to put American soldiers and bases and equipment. You just put Americans there as almost like a human shield. And Russia knows that if they invade, they're attacking an American economic partner. Maybe Ukraine's in the European Union. It's like a soft guarantee that doesn't involve a ton of American security personnel and equipment on the border. That might be an effective tripwire. But this is not good enough for the Ukrainians and the Europeans. They're saying that's not going to do anything. Russia might invade anyway. So what Ukraine wants is they want a defensive pact. And Europe wants America to bring in a defensive pact. But here's what's funny about this. America doesn't want to do this for Ukraine. Europe doesn't even want to do this for Ukraine. This is what Kiev wants. Kiev wants security. Europe wants to provide it, but they are not willing or able to provide it unless the United States provides it. So Ukraine and Europe are saying, we need to do more to protect Ukraine, but Europe is not willing to do it unless we are there. In other words, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, they will not put their personnel in Ukraine unless we do. And why is that? Because they know that collectively, Ukraine, Germany, France, and the UK, they stand no chance against Russia. So they're begging us, please defend Ukraine. Please defend even our guys in Ukraine. And they're trying to boss us around, telling us what to do with our own military to serve their interests. And Trump is telling them, well, if you want to protect yourselves from Russia, why don't you build a military then? Why don't you spend some of your GDP? We're already maxing out our military. We're running out of money. We have $1 trillion interest payment. We're defending Taiwan. We're defending Israel. We're defending all of you. Now you want us to commit to fighting Russia. You won't spend 2% of your GDP on your own military. You want us to provide the continental defense while you have free healthcare and free education? Why don't you build a military and then you can have your own security guarantee for yourselves and for Ukraine? Because that's ultimately what it's about. The Europeans are alarmed by this because they know that if Ukraine falls, that makes them less secure. If Russia's breaking through in Ukraine, they probably won't invade the rest of Europe, but they could. And if they could, then you have to assume that they might. And so Europe is wholly unprepared to defend themselves against Russian drone warfare, against any of it. They just don't have the personnel or the will or the money or the equipment or the productive capacity. And that's why they need the United States. That's why they're begging the United States, please put boots on the ground in harm's way in Ukraine to uphold any kind of peace agreement. That, at the end of the day, that is the diplomacy. It's a 3- or 4-way diplomacy between Russia, the European Union, and Ukraine, and the United States. And as long as the United States is unwilling to commit to security guarantees, as long as Europe and Ukraine are unwilling to give up territory unless America gives security guarantees, and as long as those security guarantees go against Russia's ambitions in the war, then the war will go on. And it will go on. It will be decided on the battlefield. Russia will keep advancing. Gradually, the United States might escalate and make it more painful for Russia. Russia's wartime economy might be slowing down. The sanctions might damage them. If Ukraine is launching missiles inside Russia, that might create problems also. But Russia, they can mobilize more too. They can resume their energy and electrical warfare against Ukraine. They can bombard Ukraine harder. There's more that they can do too. And so at the end of the day, the war will keep going on until one side is going to be exhausted, until it's clear that Russia has made a breakthrough and they can't be stopped in Ukraine. And at that point, they'll be able to impose a peace. Or on the other side, maybe Russia will find it very painful to continue the war, and then they will have to back down from some of their maximalist demands. But that's where the war sits right now. Either way, when you look at it across the board, it's clear that Trump does not have the magic wand that he said that he did. And there's something interesting about that. Trump was elected on the premise that all these wars were the result of Biden and the Democrats and these neocon warmongers, and yet he finds himself in all of them. Regime change in Venezuela. We're doing more sanctions on Russia than Biden. We're doing missile strikes on Russia that were authorized under Biden. The peace in Gaza is falling apart. We already bombed Iran. In many ways, World War III is inevitable unless you get an administration that is truly America first, that is actually willing to give up, actually, on some of the most, you could say, the biggest and broadest claims of American empire. Maybe it's time to give up Ukraine. Maybe it's time, actually, to give up on some of these things. Maybe it's time to recognize that some of these commitments are not actually doing anything for America. We have overcommitted. And let's just be honest with ourselves. People talk about projecting strength. What strength? Look at our supply chains. Look at our insolvency crisis. Look at our own cities. We have a very serious problem, which is that people are talking about we need to project strength abroad. First of all, we're overcommitted. That's to begin with. We're committed to defending Taiwan against China, Europe from Russia, Israel from the entire Middle East. We're trying to overturn all of the governments in Central and South America. And we're doing it from a very weak position. The commitments are increasing, but our ability to finance them is decreasing. The supply chains that create the productive capacity for our wealth, for our power projection, is in jeopardy. China is putting restrictions on rare earths. We have this enormous appetite for electricity, for silicon wafers, for chips. The cities are exploding with political violence, racial violence. We have a $1 trillion interest payment every year. We have a $30 trillion debt. We have inflation. So if there's going to be a way out of this, we are going to actually have to do a managed retreat. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it something else. But if we don't do something like that, there's going to be a collapse. And by that, I don't mean it's going to be like a post-apocalyptic wasteland, although it might be. But I'm saying that something has got to give here. We actually can't defend Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel simultaneously while we're at war with Venezuela, while there's major civil instability in the cities, while our supply chains are in jeopardy. China's doing all the rare earths processing. Taiwan makes all the advanced semiconductors and chips. We can't pay for anything. We have inflation. We have these economic problems. People talk about projecting power. There's going to be no more power if we don't get our own house in order. And if all of our commitments to every country, if those commitments are tested, the whole thing is going to collapse like a house of cards. Because right now, our ability to defend these other countries is theoretical. Could we win a war with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela simultaneously? That's all theoretical. We could maybe defend Taiwan from China. We could maybe defend Ukraine from Russia, and so on. Can we do them all simultaneously for a prolonged period of time? Probably not. If that were tested, if those commitments were put to the test, probably you'd find out very quickly that we could not do those things. And we would be undermined from within. So this is a real problem, and I think that Trump is making it worse because Trump is not who he said he was. These commitments that he made, we're going to end all the wars, no new wars, etc., wasn't true. America first, bring in people that are against the deep state, never happened. So we're in a lot of trouble here. This does not feel like a good situation, and I would urge a lot of people that are delusional about this, people that are, these online that are talking about, don't chimp out. First of all, you're fucking 40 years old. That's not funny. People say we shouldn't chimp. Don't chimp out on Trump. Trust the plan. First of all, that's not funny. Those are stale memes. You're 37 years old. You're a faggot. You know, for people that are online, you know what I'm talking about. People that are on Twitter. It's not about chimping out or trusting the plan. We have to stop being delusional and in denial. We are headed towards serious problems. Anybody that has their finger on the pulse can see this. There's an ominous, foreboding, dreadful feeling that we are headed towards a seismic inflection point. We're talking 1917, 1945, 1989, all rolled into one. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. It's this multipolar shift. It's this monetary system which is coming down, the diversity problem, and all the associated political problems in the US and Europe. We are undergoing a convulsion of everything at once, a revolution truly in every domain. And what we need now is better leadership, more tactful, more strategic, thinking longer term. This president does not think strategically, he thinks tactically. And that's why it's schizophrenic. That's why one week we're rolling out the red carpet, the next week we're saying we're gonna win the war against Russia. One week he's saying, I don't know what the fuck they're doing. And then the next week he's in Israel saying, pardon Netanyahu, he's really tough. Like, where's the consistency? Where is there a strategy here? Do you think deeply about these problems? Does anybody? Are you just on the phone all day? Trump is on the phone all day like a fucking girl, kicking his feet on his bed. I'm the best. I'm on top. I'm the man. He's 100 years old. He's losing his mind. The people in his government are fucking incompetent. Brooke Rollins, Kristi Noem, Pete Hegseth, these people are idiots. These people are idiots. Trump is out to lunch. He's surrounded by idiots. Like, it's not good. Seriously. Mark my words. This is not going to end well. And I have not always talked like this, but this has been a crescendo for 10 years. It started in 2015. Arguably, it started before then, and it has been a slow crescendo. And you look around at all these problems, you're getting worse and not better. The political violence, the wars that are unraveling all over the world, the economic problems, all these things are getting worse and not better. They always have been. And now they're coming to a head all at once. So not to be a doomsayer, but we're in a lot of trouble here. Yeah, so anyway, so that's that. We're going to move on. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say. I'll get set up here. We'll take a look. But it's not good. And what Trump should do, in my opinion, we need someone that's truly America first. We need someone to really take control and use this opportunity to go after the left, take control of the cities, deport the illegals, put this economy on a wartime footing, okay? Subsidies, tariffs, get people working in factories. This like chip ecosystem, the TSMC project in Arizona, redouble your efforts on that. Scale it back in Ukraine, scale it back in the Middle East. Like, we have to kind of hunker down. We have to fortify the center if we can project power. But it doesn't seem to be a lot of seriousness. There doesn't seem to be a whole of government totalizing approach that's comprehensive. It seems like we're kind of fucking around with all these different things, short-term thinking on all of them. So, all right. But anyway, let's take a look.
All right. Not going to spend too much time when it comes to the Russia and Ukraine situation, really, because I'm mostly paying attention to Israel and Palestine, to where Russia and Ukraine has almost, it's been going on for so long. When did this Russia-Ukraine, hold on, let's look this up. When did the Russia-Ukraine war start? So this is 2022. It says Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm sure that, depending on what side you're on, they may look at that date a bit differently as far as when the war started. But just wanted to get a reference. frame of reference. And it seems like more of the same. The main takeaway with all of this is just Trump looks terrible in all this. And he's making us look bad. He's making us look bad. He keeps playing hands, reneging or putting out certain things as if the war, take my word for it. And everything he does, it just seems to be violated, doesn't seem to come true. He's out here begging for a Nobel Peace Prize. He was talking all this no new war-ish, that he could end Russia and Ukraine on day one or before he got in office, or the war wouldn't even have started if he was the president. I'd say that's highly debatable. Nick went over that he was supposed to go out and meet Putin, that he's growing some frustrations with Putin, where he said, that every time he's on the phone with Putin, they have a great conversation, but nothing seems to come from it. Who's playing who? Who's playing who? Because when I look at how Trump interacts with a lot of these leaders, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu, whether it's Putin, maybe even Zelensky, who's playing who? Now, it's easy for Trump to have Zelensky in his office and beat his chest, let Zelensky know, hey, without our support, you wouldn't even be in this thing. That's easy, but Trump, where's the testicular fortitude when it comes to all these other things that you promised us? I'm not going to talk about Israel and all that other stuff. We already talked about that on the last video. But where's all of this energy that you had criticizing Biden and Kamala Harris, acting as if you could just solve this situation, create some type of peace deal, ceasefire at the very least, the moment that you stepped in office? You've been saying for a very long time you got a great relationship with Putin. What's really going on? Now we're green lighting strikes again. We're putting sanctions on Russian energy companies. We're allowing the missile strikes on Russian territory. He's no longer meeting with Putin. I already said that. And you know what else comes to mind as well? Perhaps this is a bit of a side note, but it continues to come to mind for me. And I've talked about it before. I don't want to give y'all fatigue when it comes to this, but if I am going to give you fatigue on anything, I'm cool with it being for this. Why are we having wars right now? It's 2025. Why are we justifying wars? A lot of these people claiming to be Christians, claiming to be Jewish. What doesn't it say it in the Bible? Thou shalt not kill. Isn't that one of the 10 commandments? So, and what's so funny about it is, I guess we're just putting ourselves above God and putting our judgment, I should say, above God, and just saying, well, let me just break this down for you, as if you can interpret it a particular way that would justify us going to war and killing God's creatures, right? Killing our fellow brothers and sisters, right? War is ugly, right? But hey, it's justified because based on what we want to accomplish here, it's us versus them. This is that whole tribalism mindset that creates this, where you think you can justify violating God's commandments. And think about it like this. If you believe that the book was inspired by God, or whoever you feel that, the scripture was written by, think about it from this standpoint. I'm pretty sure we could agree that 2,000 years ago, times were a bit more barbaric. Could we say that? I believe that society is supposed to be advanced, right? Civilization is supposed to be advanced. So when it comes to us living in more barbaric times, you're telling me that God inspired somebody to write, and this is the words that we're supposed to live by, of not killing in the most barbaric times. But now when we're in this advanced society, we can't figure out a way to solve problems without wars. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't understand what the wars solve anyway. At the end of this war between Russia and Ukraine, it'll be interesting to see what happens as far as who wins what and who loses what. What are we just going to have hundreds of thousands of people die and then just redraw the same lines that were there, or figure out something that could have been figured out early on in the process before maybe we even got to the war situation? But because we see war as a viable option, we're always going to be willing to take things there, right? Wherever the most radical or extreme point is along that spectrum, we're going to figure out a way to get there one way or another if it's a realistic option that we all accept. Perhaps we should stop accepting this as an option. Perhaps we should stop accepting this as an option. And even we better be careful, because with us getting disrespected, and I'm talking about Trump and people violating his words, well, why should I be surprised? We violate God's commandments, right? We violate what the Old Testament says, right? Bibi Netanyahu. So why would I be surprised when you violate the ceasefire that Donald Trump and America put in play? It's bad and it's a shame, but it seems like things are going to have to get even worse for us to wake up and realize, or for enough of us to stand up and say, like, yo, war is not it. We're not accepting that anymore. We're not voting for that. We're not supporting it. We're not rocking with it. None of the above. So we'll see what ends up happening in this conflict, what the end result is. But one thing that I do want us, and I'll remind y'all, don't worry, y'all remind me if I forget, but I want us to really look into when this conflict, this war is over, if it could have been resolved in a different way. Because Zelensky and Putin are never going to look at it like that. You want to know why? Because they're not the ones fighting. They're not the ones who are risking their lives, in my opinion. They're not frontlining. They're not the pawns that are out there dying. They're not the people that are getting picked up in cars so they can, force you to enter the military. We got to figure out a different way. And if we're going to be the big brother to everybody, then perhaps we can show some leadership in a positive way, rather than just going along with the wars that were supposed to be ended. But it seems like now we're just adding fuel to the fire of these never-ending wars. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But that's all I got for y'all. So make sure that y'all continue to like, subscribe, turn your notifications on if you haven't already. Really appreciate y'all. Really appreciate y'all continuing to rock with me, continuing to just show support, show love, show comments. That's the most important thing you can do. Leave a comment. Leave a comment. As I always say, I'm biased. So I need y'all to make sure that I'm seeing things from as an objective of a perspective as possible. And the best way for me to do that is to make sure that I'm learning from everybody's experiences. So on that note, I shall let y'all go, and I'll see you on the next one.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.